Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Go For It. I'm Chris Rapley. Today, whenever you're watching this, we have a wonderful guest, Cheryhl Gardner Price. Cheryhl Gardner Price is not only a tax preparer, but she has a lot of other talents. She may even sing today. I mean, I'm not trying to put her on the spot, but she may ever sing. I'm just letting you know. Mm-hmm. But of course, you know, with the current administration, what we have a lot of changes when it comes to tax preparation and tax laws. Mm-hmm. So we just wanted to bring her in to explain to us how we can get the best out of what we need to get when it comes to taxes and how we can stay out of trouble.
That's right.
How are you doing?
I'm well. It is well.
It is well.
The season is slowing down a little bit, so we're finding that balance again, but still in operation.
So I got a question, because you know I came in right before April 15th.
Right.
But of course, a lot of information went out that a lot of people thought they had extra time.
Correct.
But you told me I got in on time because we weren't designated for that.
Well, it was kind of a 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, because when you went to the IRS website to read up on who that extension was applying to, it intentionally mentioned those who were affected by the storm. And we, as in Albany, Georgia, and certain parts of Georgia, were not affected by the storm. So it was kind of like, you know, are we included in this extension or are we not? And so the sensible thing to do was to just abide by that first deadline, because I didn't know if there was some way that they were able to code it or to recognize if you were indeed in an area or city that was affected versus if you were not. So to be safe, we just stayed intact with that April 15th deadline.
Right. And so did I do right, or did we actually get an extension?
Well, May 1st was the extended deadline that they gave. So I'm going to say if you had it done by April 15th, you were in there. You know, we have to say it twice.
Right.
Put emphasis on it. But if you were not able to get it done until May 1st, then you should be, according to what they have online, you should be safe as well.
Okay, so, you know, the next thing I want to know is, you shared something, and I also want to say this lady is an influencer as well. You shared something that was pretty funny about when you go see your tax preparer, and the gentleman was nodding his head. The husband was
talking about the video.
Right.
Yes, I love that. That was spot on. It was perfect. I wish that there was a sign that I could get made, and I probably can get it made, that I would put across my desk, and it would just simply say, if I don't ask you, don't tell me.
Right.
Because there's a lot of things that we can, I'm going to use the word direct traffic on as it regards to taxes. And I kind of need you to just feel me on certain things, because we do have a due diligence to make sure that the person across from us is being truthful, and that we actually, as a first leg, are buying into what it is that you are displaying before it gets to the IRS. But sometimes people hurt themselves because they kind of give us too much information.
Right.
But I thought that was hysterical, because the gentleman in the video was actually trying to help the couple. And sometimes, a lot of times, it's things that they are legitimately entitled to, and they just don't know.
Right.
And so we're trying to say, yes, I'm asking you this question, and I need you to feel where my head is going on this one.
Right.
But yes, we oftentimes, that makes the difference as to whether or not you're going to a tax preparer versus a tax professional.
And you're a tax professional.
Yes, I am, because a tax preparer is simply going to take what it is that you say, and they're going to put that in, no questions asked, and they're just going to, more data entry, for lack of a better word. But a tax professional is going to try to pull out of you those things that, you know, they know can help you. They're going to ask more in-depth questions. They're going to look for expenses when it comes down to a business that you may or may not have. Or if you have a legitimate right to claim somebody, they're going to dig into that to make sure that it's legitimate before continuing. So that's a big difference between a tax preparer versus a tax professional on any given day.
Right. And where's the industry? Where's the tax preparation industry heading? Because you know they
Yeah,
were saying that they gonna excuse me, that they're gonna like make it where it's free.
Yep.
And
Yep. And you can imagine that when I first heard that, it was like, oh my goodness, we're going to be out of business. So we did have a conversation, another tax professional and myself, to kind of plan out where we're looking to go beyond this point. Because not all states are grafted in. They're kind of doing a pilot program now to see how it's going to work. But what we do know is that they're keeping it with the simple tax preparation. They're not offering services to anything complicated, meaning your businesses, your 501c3s, corporation stuff. They're farming, they're leaving all of that out. So what they're saying is, if you are a state that is that they have implemented it with, and Georgia is not one of them yet, by the way, but they're saying that you can go online to the IRS website and you can do your tax return for free with an IRS representative and not have to pay anything, which would definitely be impactful to those of us that it provides a substantial living for. There's some pros and there's some cons when you choose to do that. And so we've kind of got some ideas in place, maybe targeting more business clients, the services that are not being offered, and just targeting those individuals to see if we can, to keep the market developed in that industry or in that vein, as opposed to the cut and dry, simple tax returns. But yeah, if you ask me, it might be good on the outside when it comes down to having an IRS person do your tax return for free, but I definitely see some negative takeaways from that as well.
Well, I'm trying to see with the cuts, all the cuts they make
Yeah.
in the government, how they're going to have time to have a tax preparer. That's what I'm trying to.
That's a good question, because they are so many thousands and years behind when it comes to tax preparation anyway. That's a very valid question, because if you don't have enough staff to keep current with the years that you're currently working on, then how can you, as you stated, get someone to be online? How long will I have to wait before a representative? Is it going to be just an automated service where it's a robot kind of thing and you got to ask to actually speak to a person? So, I've not had the pleasure of walking through it myself, which I like to have those experiences so that I can convey them to the clients that I service. But yeah, I don't see that. I really don't.
So is that something like what H&R Block and TurboTax, they have the free tax?
They do, and it's free to a degree, because even with those free softwares, when you go online and you get to a certain point and you get to the end of it, it's going to say, hey, you owe us, or in order to electronically file this, you'll have to pay this portion, or they'll say the federal form was free, but you have to pay for the state. And then if it's a business, they're going to throw you into a whole different category anyway. But what you're going to lose is that personal touch.
Right.
There's not going to be a person at the IRS, handling your free tax return that knows Chris.
Right.
Or looks out for his best interest.
Right.
Or knows even about his situation or his business. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So they're going to be basically data entry at that point. They're taking the information that you give them, plugging it in, and just hoping for the best possible outcome. And even with that, they're not going to offer the advice. They're not going to ask the questions. If you're one of those persons that get the advances in the year, they won't have those features. They won't have the green dots and the directive. All of that stuff goes away when you deal with someone online. There's no referral programs. So if you send somebody, there's not a break or an incentive that you get for being personable, or none of that.
Well, we want to go to the next thing.
Okay.
And things that draw attention to the IRS.
Red flags.
Red flags,
You have them in relationships. You have them on the job. Red flags are everywhere, so the IRS is not excluded. And what I tell my clients that sit across the table from me is simple, and it is, if you've got to convince me that it's believable first. And if it's not believable to me, trust and believe the IRS ain't going to buy it either.
You know, because like when I see certain things and they're saying $10,000 refunds.
Yeah. If you are a business, you are up under IRS scrutiny anyway. I have a client who's been a long-time client of mine, and she was unfortunate this year. We did nothing wrong, nothing out of the ordinary that we've been doing all years, but because their awareness is heightened now, and there was so much fraud in these last couple of years, especially, there were just certain things that if you had them on your tax return, she was one of those random people that just got selected for a review, and they initially sent her a letter that said, hey, we need an extra 30 days to review this. And then they came back with another letter that said, hey, we need 30 more days. And then after that, they came back with another letter saying we need an extra 60 days. And I told her there is nothing in my power that I'm able to do to force them to go ahead and process that return. And going back to what we stated earlier, it's probably just a matter of insufficient staffing. We just don't have anybody to look at it right now. Because I prepared the return, so I know it's a legitimate return.
I know.
But that's what we look at. IRS looks for, if you are a male, filing a child on a tax return, that is an automatic red flag.
And that's sad.
It's an automatic red flag because they know that if there's not a woman attached to that tax return, and especially if it's a girl, then they're not buying into the fact that a man is taking care of his daughter.
And I actually ran into that because when my wife passed, of course, several years I had to file with my daughter. And yeah, it slowed it down. It's like, what you mean? What you trying to say?
Yep. If there are gaps in between years, if you are 20 years old and that's the last time you filed a tax return and now you're 32 years old, they're looking at where have you been? For these last few years. So not filing consistently is another thing that's an IRS red flag. And for businesses, there was a lot of fuel tax credits and airplane credits and stuff that preparers were putting on tax returns that are not, those people did not get funded. Once the IRS caught wind as to what was happening, anything that even had those credits on it this year was an automatic holdup. They were not funding them until they verified that those people were actually entitled to those credits. So can you imagine what that did to the farmers who were actually entitled to, or the aviation persons who were actually entitled to those credits? Theirs probably got slowed down as well.
So I'm thinking about, starting a honey badger farm.
Okay, a honey badger farm. Okay.
Yeah, honey badgers.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
You ever seen a honey?
I haven't.
Yeah, but they're
Enlighten me.
friendly. They're honey badgers, they say they're violent, but they're not.
Are they the things that kind of look like the raccoon kind of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I was thinking about starting one of those farms, but adopting them as my children. Can I?
Okay, I'm sorry.
I mean, would you be able to file that and prepare that for me?
No, exactly not. So some of the things that I look for when you come in, and especially if you're a first-time client. So if you're a repeat client, let me just say that.
I'm repeat
but this is your first time filing
with my honey badger.
Your honey badger child, correct?
Yes.
All right. So we're going to look to see if there's a legitimate Social Security number. We're going to look for birth certificates proving that you are the father. We might even ask you for some mail that comes to that address of that pediatrician that is medically taking care of said honey badger before we still tell that we can't do it.
I'm just saying.
But yeah, we do have those last names, and I know you can't really say that anymore because the times have gone away where family structures have everybody with the house the same name.
Right.
There are even times where husbands and wife file together where sometimes the wife still hasn't changed over her last name, so the last names may be different. That is something the IRS looks for because they're trying to determine if that is your immediate family versus a niece or a nephew or a grandchild, because believe it or not, some of those relations don't get the same tax benefits. And people have caught on to that. They know that if I say this is my son or daughter, it's going to get me more than if I say this is my niece or nephew. So, yeah, we have to, being a tax professional, definitely, I mentioned the word due diligence before, but there are some hefty fines out there that I'm willing to bet that our tax clients are not willing to help us pay for doing untruthful things. So there are some hefty fines. If they can prove that you knew that Chris was lying and you did his tax return anyway, we've heard the saying that not all money is good money. Absolutely. So in my career, I've found that I've had to turn away some clients because I just couldn't wrap my mind around doing that tax return. And I tell you, a story about one of my favorites. I use it just about in every speaking engagement that I have. So I had a young man that came in and he was wanting to claim his daughter. So that was my first red flag. And she was under 6 months old, which was my second red flag because I'm trying to figure out where mom is. He told me that he was self-employed. I asked him what kind of work did he do, and he told me that he cut grass. He was, did a lot of landscaping. So I asked him, well, who keeps your baby while you're out doing these things? And he said, oh, the mom lives in Camilla, so I take the baby to Camilla. And so I said, okay, so you get up in the morning, you get your daughter ready after you feed her all these things, and then you drive her to Camilla, and then you drive back to Albany, and you do all this landscaping during the day, and then you drive all the way back to Camilla to pick your baby up, and then you drive all the way back home in the evening time. And granted, Camilla's not far. However, that was a far-fetched picture to me. Could it be true? Could. Possibly. Yeah. There's still a possibility. So then I go the step further to say, okay, what are you driving? And I can't remember, but it had to be something in the neighborhood of like a Geo Metro. And I'm thinking to myself, you made over $30,000, $40,000 doing yards, which automatically tells me there's got to be some kind of riding lawnmower. There's got to be some equipment if you're making that kind of money doing lawn services.
How you transporting it? And
you're transporting it with a Geo Metro. You're hooking a trailer to. So at this point, it starts to get unbelievable to me.
Deep.
Yes. And so I had to say to him, sir, I apologize, but you just don't. And then you didn't have the documentation to back that up. A lot of people, I've had it where business owners have literally tried to sit in my presence and handwrite receipts. And it's like, there's no way that you can convince me that you remember every client that you service, Chris. Can you tell me every client that you service from January to now? And tell me how much you charged them? No. And what they're not. Yeah, no. and so.
I mean, if I could, that means I'm not doing any work.
Exactly. Exactly. So I've had those situations where I've had to say, I can't, because if this comes back, you have to provide me. It's no different than an attorney. You have to give me enough evidence to cover me. Right. At the end of the day, beyond that, if I'm covered, then, if you want to take that risk, so be it. But if it can't get past me, then it's definitely not going to get. And a lot of people mess up because they think that if I don't hear from the IRS the first year or the year that I file it, then I'm clear. Or if the second year I don't hear from the IRS, then I'm clear. But here comes that third year, and the IRS is questioning me for something that I've done 2 and 3 years back. That's what people don't take into account. They buy into the fact that if I can just get this money in my hand right now, then I'll worry about those consequences later. And then it shows up when you're ready to buy your house. It shows up when you're ready to get into that serious relationship and that person doesn't want to receive you with all of this stuff, attached to it. So it shows up later in life, and we find out sooner than later that we're not so prepared to deal with it on the later side. Yep.
Right. So you saying you done found this wonderful woman, a husband, and all of a sudden,
Yeah, exactly.
and they dip on you.
Yeah, yeah. Can I tell you another funny story? I've got so many of them. I've been doing this for quite a while. So, again, it's one of my favorite. So I was helping said gentleman doing his taxes, and he, had gotten into some arrears, going to school, paying for student loans, all this kind of stuff. So I was helping him to go online and set up payment arrangement. And we were talking. He was a good friend of mine. And he said, I should have dated you. I should have asked you out. And but without thinking, I looked at him and I was like, you must have forgot I do your taxes. and we got a good laugh out. And he was like, well, darn, you know what? You actually right. And he's like, I'm going to voluntarily step into this mess you created. Oh, no. So, yeah, people don't think about the hindsight until, it's in their face. So
You must have forgot I do your taxes.
Yeah, we got a good laugh off that.
I know that any day now. Any day.
Yeah.
You walking out like this.
Yes, they coming. They coming. Means you not gonna. I'm gonna have to do extra, above and beyond to help take care of this household, because your money gonna be going somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are that serious, and I can't tell you. I see it more frequently than I need to. Yeah.
And speaking of taxes, and you brought up student loans.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is from a person who got student loans, and a lot of people I know got student loans.
I do too. Yeah.
This is getting, I reckon, scary. I reckon. I mean, how is this going to affect when it comes to taxes and everything?
I
and
am
can you
praying
help us?
and sowing seeds. I have heard everything about them getting ready to garnish wages and up to a certain percentage. I got in right on the tail end. I submitted my application for forgiveness and everything, and I was right there in that hang up where they put a freeze on it until legislation met and did some of those things. So right now, the only implications it could have is if the student loan entity submitted documentation to the IRS and said, hey, they owe us X amount of dollars. So even in your refund, even if you were entitled to that $10,000, when you were awarded it, it would go to your student loan and not to your bank account.
The whole thing?
The whole thing. If they say you owe 20 and your refund is only 10, they're going to take that 10 and apply it to that 20. So I guess you could look at it as a good thing in terms of, well, it's at least it's going to pay the student loan. Yeah, I know. The prayers of the righteous availeth much, so we need to pray.
Yes, and also, can you explain a little bit on how, when it comes to child support, and you're in the risk for child support, how does that work? I know a lot of people have questions
everything evolves around whether or not that entity submits that documentation to federal government, the IRS. And child support is one of those entities. Right. So they don't take it from everybody. So, if you owe the cell phone company, the IRS doesn't collect for the cell phone company. But child support is one of those. I'm a firm believer, and sad to say that men get a bad rap when it comes down to the IRS, just hands down. That's why a lot of them don't file, because they know that they owe child support and they know that it's going to be taken. On the good side, at least that amount goes towards the debt that's owed in child support. Right. But again, that is what keeps a lot of young men from filing, a lot of older men from filing. That is a lot of the reasons why husbands and wives do not file correctly, because according to the IRS, if you are married, there's only one of two ways that IRS gives you to file, and that's married filing joint or married filing separate. But a lot of married couples, one of them, especially if there are children involved, one of them will do single, the other one will do head of household. That is incorrect. And that goes back to the previous topic that we were talking about with those IRS representatives online doing the free tax returns. So if you are not aware that this is how you're filing, and then you go divulging that information to that IRS representative, they are going to say, no sir, no ma'am, this is incorrect, we can't file. So you're basically alerting them to the fact that in years past, you've been doing it incorrectly. And see, there's a statute of limitations that they only go back 3 years. But when they can prove that you've been doing something incorrectly, then they can go back as far as they want to go back. And they'll make you amend those returns. They'll make you fix them. And now you may be in a position where you owe. So yeah,
15 years later.
Yeah, it
and they're
matters.
going to hit you with the interest.
It matters. The interest, and not only that, the penalties also. Yep. There's a lot that we are not aware. We're not trying to know, because the truth of the matter is, during tax season, all everybody cares about, most people cares about, is I don't want to owe, and how much am I getting back?
Right,
Yep.
right.
They don't care if the person across from it. And a lot of people think that because I'm the tax professional, that if something is done wrong on my tax return, that the IRS only comes at me.
No, ma'am.
And that's
No,
not
sir.
true. Because the minute you sign, you are agreeing with everything that I put down on that paper.
Yeah, I know. I sign on. And she makes sure I know what I'm signing to. Are you sure, Mr. Rapley?
That's it.
Is it? Yep. All right.
And I'm trying to explain to the best of my ability. This is what you can expect. Yeah.
Wow. So, what else you got going on besides taxes?
Other than learning how to be a new wife.
Congratulations.
Yes, going on month number 5 in a couple of days. Ministry is very, very big. I just found out yesterday, as a matter of fact, that I will be doing my initial sermon on the first Sunday in June.
Wow.
Yeah, so God is definitely growing me up spiritually in big ways. I also work in financial assistance at the hospital, so I'm busy. I'm not idle in the least bit.
You know what? And that's another thing while we talking. You know, just because you own a business, that don't mean you don't work. That's just like me. I own a business, but that doesn't mean I don't work.
Correct.
And, you know, and you're married, just like I'm married, and we work a business, and we got our own business.
That's it.
So my thing is, how do you keep it balanced?
You got to use wisdom. And now for me, this conversation can turn spiritual in real quick, because that's the avenue and the vein that I'm operating in. I have to keep my ear close to the heavens, because what may seem good may not be good at the time.
Right.
And so I'm definitely got to be prayed up and considering God in all my ways. There was a point in time where I was just strictly operating my business, but that was because financially I was renting a space, and the income that I was bringing in was enough to substantiate me in everything. So I was not at Phoebe during that time, and I enjoyed it. But then came the opportunity to step my game up, and instead of renting, I'm now purchasing a building.
Right.
And anybody that's gone into any type of mortgage knows there's a whole different level of accountability when you come into buying.
Right.
And so with that, I knew there had to be a season of the business now being able to resubstantiate itself with the new bills, that were there. And so again, wisdom said, hey, you got some choices to make here.
Right.
I could have said, let me eliminate my staff and, let me just be the employee and I just run this business. But I opted to keep the staff, because good staff is not easy to find.
That's right.
And so I opted to allow her to remain employed and me just go back to work and attack it that way. So you got to have plans. People that are walking away from jobs, that are doing entrepreneurship, better love what they do in this day and age, because especially when you don't know what's coming down the pipeline, government-wise, it's just so many things to consider, and marketing and trying to get people in. Service-based businesses are affected very differently than
Right.
those who offer products and services. If you are doing hair, if you're doing nails, if you are cooking food, it's safe to say that for the next few years, you're good. You're still in the game. But for those who are rendering services, not so much.
Because good example, you know, I mean, I do video production. You know, I do a wedding every now and then, but most of my stuff is business based. So when you have a city like Thomasville, who just got cut $20 million in grants, and you know, I could have been doing this stuff for downtown development.
Right. Now, yeah, not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah.
It's like, sorry, Ms. Rapley, we can't do this because
Exactly.
blah, blah, blah.
Exactly.
You know, we going to be on our iPhone, Android.
Exactly.
You know,
Everybody is having to reevaluate what they do. And even beyond tax season, during the off season, we do a lot of payroll, a lot of bookkeeping, a lot of office
Right.
work for businesses, and particularly the small or local business owners. And if you, with the pressure that's going on right now, think about it. People are trying to figure out, what can I do myself that I can stop paying somebody else to do, and you can't blame them. You know,
Can't blame 'em.
because everybody's trying to survive. Everybody's trying to make it from, you know, one point to the next point. So entrepreneurship hits very differently. When I find out that people are moving in that vein, I'm praying for them, because it's not easy. You know, there's been a lot of times that I have truthfully sat at home and said, listen, do I need to take this tax business back to the house? Do I need to just rent a spot to meet people in, you know, versus trying to, you know, own a building? Because then there's the portion of renting business spaces and suites. It could be a handful. And if you're not worshiping, if you don't have the source that you are tapped into, it can get overwhelming quick, fast, and in a hurry.
Right,
Yep.
right. So, you know, I appreciate you coming in today and everything.
Yes,
you know,
sir.
and
My pleasure.
sharing your story and sharing how you can keep us out of trouble.
Yes.
You ain't gonna sing, man?
No.
You ain't gonna hum? You did hum?
There's nothing that's coming up in my spirit at the moment. So maybe that'll be another podcast on a different day.
Okay.
Talk about some music ministry and some stuff like that. Because, you know, I play piano too. Did you know that?
No, I did not know you played piano.
I do.
Do you have a piano at the office?
I don't. My preference is singing, because that's where my anointing is. But yeah, along that pathway, I picked up the skill too.
Wait, how long you been playing piano?
Oh gosh, since I was in middle school.
I had no idea.
Since I was in middle school. Yep.
Wow. Well,
If I had to, I can accompany myself. I can sit down, and not my preference, but if I had to, I could.
So you can Aretha Franklin it. You can play.
I can do that.
Okay.
I
Thank
can
you
do that.
again for coming in.
I appreciate it. Marketing is not easy, so I commend you on helping business owners get their message out.
Yeah.
We need all the help we can get, so thank you very much for having me today.
And thank you for keeping us out of trouble. I'm Chris Rapley with Go For It, and we'll see you next time. Girl, it was a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Thank you. They be pretending just talking.
Yeah.
Because, you know, at the window, the music's going to be going.
Okay,
All
gotcha.
that good stuff.
Gotcha.
Everything
Yep.
like that, you know. So
This is the-
you saying I cannot get these honey badgers.
You don't do the honey badges. Those would not be preferred. Just stick with something that you can get a Social Security number for.
Listen, me and a friend of mine is thinking about opening up a raccoon milk cheese farm.
Stop it. You think people would like it?
Raccoon milk cheese.
No.
We're working on that right now.
That's kind of like I heard on the news they were talking about with eggs being so expensive. People starting to eat ostrich eggs and stuff. I was like, no.
Now you remember back in the 90s when they were selling emu and ostrich eggs back in the 90s and emu meat? You don't remember
I
that?
don't remember that. I was in the 90s. I graduated in 92, so I
Yeah,
was on
around
college.
93.
I went,
Yeah, 93. Around here, everybody trying to
I
sell
don't
ostrich
want
and emus down
nothing.
here. in
It's
Georgia.
another animal, something, the eggs that they were trying to sell. And it's like, no.
What about duck-billed platypus?
Duck eggs. Now I've heard that those were good, but I can't. I can't wrap my mind around it. I'm a visual, and if I see myself, yeah, I can't. Like I don't even eat chicken wings.